Time for business news now on the programme. Brian Quinn is here. He is delighted. He's taking a brief break from trade wars to talk about something a little bit more, fun, to be honest. Travel, Brian.
We're going to get into travel, and I'm not going to lie to you, Stuart, there's going to be some trade war talk in here, unfortunately. But Thursday marks the opening of the 48th annual International Tourism Salon here in Paris, with exhibitors from around the world promoting their destinations. 2024 was a record year for France. 100 million foreign visitors came to see the sites, with the largest segments coming from other Northern European countries and the US. They brought in an estimated 71 billion euros in revenues. That's a 12% increase over 2023. But while France remains the world's top tourism destination, Spain is quickly catching up. It welcomed 94 million visitors last year. They actually spent more money, 126 billion euros, as tourists tend to book longer stays in Spain than they do here in France. In third place, the United States, and even when it comes to vacations, trade wars are having an effect. Bookings along the US-Canada border fell by around 10% last month. That's a trend that could cost the US $2 billion in lost revenue if it keeps up for the year. Canadian tour operators say Donald Trump's tariffs on their country, as well as his apparently sincere desire to turn Canada into the 51st U.S. state, are taking a toll on their businesses. Take a listen here.
We've been very careful not to broadcast and demonstrate U.S. assets to Canadian audiences and Canadian assets to U.S. audiences, because when we found that has drawn out a lot of negative sentiment. And we don't want to besmirch our partners and our destination that way. So what we have done is kind of pivoted to New York landmarks being shown to New York audiences, Canadian landmarks being shown to Canadian target audiences.
Markets now, Brian. You can't avoid talking about those either.
No, happily. Always want to talk about the markets. Asian indexes, unfortunately, they lost ground on Thursday. Tokyo and Seoul, the only ones managing to stay near the flat line. Japan's 7&I Holdings got a slight bump as Canadian retailer Couche-Tard says it's considering raising its $47 billion bid to take over the iconic 7-Eleven convenience store brand. 7&I has so far stonewalled that offer, but it is coming under increasing shareholder pressure to consider it. European indexes, meanwhile, opening in the red as well, as the continent braces for more U.S. tariffs on the way. Automakers leading the losses this morning. Recent softer than expected inflation data out of the U.S. had been hoped to provide a boost for global markets, which have been sliding downwards and downwards as Donald Trump's trade wars escalate. Earlier, France 24 spoke with Jamil Ahmad, chief analyst at GTC, about the ongoing fallout from those tariffs.
So the annual inflation rate came in at 2.8% against 2.9% expected. This data, which came out for last month, which would have been February, comes out this month, which is, of course, March. That's not going to show yet the impact of tariffs and so forth on consumers. And I think that's going to be the risk for inflation data as we start heading towards maybe the end of the second quarter and the second half of 2025.
And finally, from business, the Trump administration tries to slash federal spending. The United Nations is embarking on its own budget reform.
So UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres insists this is not a Doge-style cull of the UN's workforce, but the 80-year-old institution is seeking to cut costs after a 7-year-long cash crunch. The Elon Musk-led effort to drastically reduce U.S. spending, though, will definitely be a factor. Washington normally supplies 22% of UN funding. That is already facing cuts since Trump's inauguration. Matthew Mary Carochet has the details.
The United Nations will soon launch a robust review of its operations in order to improve efficiency and cut costs. Faced with waning contributions, the UN has reduced planned spending by up to 20%, laid off thousands of workers, and imposed a hiring freeze.
Budgets at the United Nations are not just numbers on a balance sheet. They are a matter of life and death for millions around the world. We must ensure value for money while advancing shared values.
For at least 7 years in a row, the international organization has faced a liquidity crisis. Only about a third of the 193 UN member states have paid their regular dues in full so far this year. The regular budget for the United Nations in 2025 is $3.7 billion, which includes political, humanitarian, disarmament, and economic work. The top contributor has been the United States, which pays 22% of the regular budget, but is in arrears, owing $1.5 billion. Since taking office 7 weeks ago, the Trump administration has substantially reduced its voluntary contributions to UN funds, sending shockwaves through the system.
We have been reliant in recent years, over-reliant on US funding. Almost half of our appeals have been funded by the American taxpayer. And it's important to recognize that we shouldn't ever take that for granted.
The UN estimates that some 300 million people around the world are reliant on humanitarian support to survive.
So budget cuts all around, Stuart, at a time when, in fact, it seems as though funding, especially for humanitarian causes, is more necessary than ever.
Yeah, Brian, thanks very much. Brian Quinn reporting for us for The Business.